What is good? In general, it's about testing how well something does the objective it was designed for. Like with a hammer, for instance, objective good can be defined as how well does it hammer in nails? Does the handle give you splinters, or how much leverage is required to remove nails? All the things that are required by a hammer. Now, defining what a good hammer is fairly easy, mainly because its objective is based on how it interacts with the world. As the results are visible to everyone, all you have to do is check the environment and see if it has fulfilled the objective of a hammer. And granted, there's some element of perspective with a hammer, like how do you define the right way to use a hammer? Will some guy with a funky-ass swing use a wobbly hammer to a much better effect than if he used a normal hammer? But when the conclusion is given by the environment, you can test each definition of good individually. You'll never technically have a unanimous all-around good for all hammers in all situations for all people, but you can drill down enough so that you only have one variable to test, so that 50 people swinging 3 different hammers in the exact same way will be able to give you a ranking for which hammer is objectively the best when used in a specific way. All you'd have to do is look at the nail that's been hammered in, check it's flush with the wood isn't damaged, and, okay, so you'd have to define what a well-hammered-in nail is as well, but you get the point. Sure, you're left with a very specific answer to which hammer is the best, but the point is it can be done. But when it comes to entertainment, you hit a huge impasse, because now physics and the environment that you were using to get your result, that is now individual people. And there are literally fucking billions of those. You can no longer drill down to only one variable. You can't test what you're testing and also each environment, i.e. the person, at the same time. That's a really shitty test. So, how are you supposed to define what is good then? Can you even define what is good? The objective of a good show is to engage the audience, but as you well know, everyone seems to have radically different opinions. The objective of entertainment is seemingly achieved differently by everyone. It'd be like if you got 2 guys to hammer in a nail and one shouted at it and the other one whacked himself in the nuts, but both of them just magically went in! Now, if you're new to me, you might be ready for me to say, yep, everything is subjective, because that's like the commonly accepted belief. But if you know me, you know I talk like I believe there is an objective good, even going so far as to readjust my theories that I've made in the past, even if they don't match up with how I personally felt. And I think before we go forward, I should explain exactly what I'm talking about by objective good, especially with a really important video around the corner. Like, that video is big, trust me. I wouldn't trick you. See, just because we can't test what's good in entertainment, that doesn't mean we can't theorize and explain why people react the way they do to entertainment. Ultimately, there's an explanation for everything. That's how, existence works. So it's theoretically possible to explain why each person reacts the way they do. Knowing this, there is one theory that gives us a definition of good in entertainment that makes sense and isn't just everyone is inherently completely different. So, Extra Credits is a pretty big weekly game design show, who, to be perfectly honest, I disagree with politically. They also make really cute plushies. God damn it, I was supposed to be boycotting you! Anyway, they talk about a paper called the MDA, and it basically outlines the core of game design. Now I'm gonna butcher this because I've made my own changes and reappropriations over time to the point where it's basically its own thing, but if you want to see what my theories are built on, click here. The idea is that there are a bunch of individual elements that are inherently engaging to everyone. Things like exploration and challenge are things we as humans find through our biology as fun and interesting. In the paper, story is written down as one of these engagements, but I'm pretty sure that can be expanded into a whole group, things like development and wordplay. But then, if there are engagements we have from birth, why does everyone enjoy different things? Well, that's what I've been calling bias. The idea that as we grow, our environment changes us so that we have preference to certain engagements. Take me, for instance. For a lot of my younger life, I was overshadowed by my brother, who was much smarter than me. I hated that feeling of being inferior, and a lot of my younger life was spent trying to be better than him. It makes perfect sense that the engagements I line up best with is challenge and competition. I love games like League and Team Fortress 2, and have had long periods of time where I'd play them obsessively trying to get better. On the flip side, fantasy games like Skyrim I just couldn't get into at all, because trying to immerse yourself in a world and put yourself in the character's shoes, it feels false to me. I don't want to pretend to be awesome, I want to actually be awesome. But to people who are fans of the fantasy engagement, they don't care about that. They become a character for the fun of it. Their brain doesn't associate it with self-worth, and to be fair, it shouldn't. It's my upbringing that created that irrational association in me. There are all sorts of bias that affect what would otherwise be default enjoyment. Nostalgia, traumatic incidents, I think even our own personal beliefs and associations can cause us to dislike things before we even give them a chance. Not to say it's all negative though. We can like things more because of the similarities to things we're experiencing at the time, because characters remind us of someone we lost, because we want to escape to a world so different from our own that we can just forget all about our lives. Now you might realize something here. If this theory of bias and engagements is true, then it means most likely that the popular stuff is what's good. Because everyone starts their life with their default engagements, it means that the majority of people will have maintained at least some of their default engagements from childhood. The most popular stuff must reflect those unbiased views that have stayed. Probably anyway. See, what's kind of nice about this definition of good is that it seems to work for other people in the community of entertainment critics. Because when people argue that the quality of a show is greater than its popularity, they usually argue in favor of what I call a majority bias. Arguments like Sword Art Online being a gateway anime or appealing to current trends, Clannad being emotionally manipulative, Akame ga Kill using shock and gore that appeals to edgy teenagers, they all form an alternative explanation as to why the majority likes it, rather than saying it meets the requirements of objective good, i.e. it uses core engagements. And I assume people are doing that because this is the definition they use, at least on some subconscious level. I mean, people just use the term good like it's a fucking thing to do. They must at least feel that they have some understanding of why they're using the word. Otherwise they would have thought about how nonsensical it is by now without some sort of, thought out definition. But hey, if you don't think so, please tell me the definition you're using. That shit is helpful for arguments, because no one takes time at the start of arguments or discussion to just define stuff anymore. Anyway, while I'll acknowledge majority bias as a legitimate theory, majority bias is never my first assumption when critiquing something. In the end, I think everyone wants to believe that their opinion is the closest to the definition of good, and rather than trust the individual or even myself, I tend to lean towards majority rules simply because it's more likely to be unbiased. I mean, which research paper do you trust more, the one with the bigger sample size or the smaller one? That doesn't mean it's necessarily right, and I'll always consider majority bias and treat them on a case-by-case basis, but I'm just saying, that's why you see me defend what's popular most of the time. If I don't like something as much as the majority, I'm suspicious of myself before anyone else. Mind you, popular equals good isn't accurate all the time anyway. Advertising, I think, plays a big part. I mean, YouTube especially, as it has this artificial system of only showing you things YouTube thinks are important, rather than the public. That's not the salty whining of an under 10k channel, I swear. I mean, you can also tell advertising is important just because otherwise, by that logic, even the shittiest Disney movies are the best thing ever. Like, have you seen these box office numbers? Every one of them is going to eclipse every small indie project, and it's statistically improbable that every single one of these handles its core engagements better than every anime in existence, which will naturally have less views because fucking reading. In fact, trying to actually pinpoint exactly how popular something is incredibly hard to measure in the first place. It's not just a matter of checking sales or view numbers. You're more looking for view to positive reaction ratios. That's why I was talking about that with Did You Drop Ruby in my last video. I also tend to side with the majority vote because that tends to be what I like anyway. And when I like something as much as the majority, I've always felt like I could find a legit reason for its popularity. So the couple of times I don't line up with the majority, I always consider if I'm biased to something first, simply because I think that's more likely. It's my belief that if I can identify all my biases and tap into every type of core engagement, I think I'll have a complete understanding of design. But I'm a long way off from that, and there's so many things I'm yet to understand. It's super easy to separate things like nostalgia as bias, but things like perspective are much muddier and harder to decode. Like, here's an interesting case study. In Did You Drop Ruby, I criticized building up one character in their big moment only for her to get her ass whooped, requiring her to be saved. But one of the top comments, hell, I think it was the highest top comment, saw a different point to that scene. They said that this was a big point of development for the character because she came in to save a faunus, a race she had previously criticized. Like, how do you judge that? Was there some kind of bias that led me to focus one part of that scene and not notice some other? Or were the people who liked that comment stretching to draw that interpretation? That's another thing I should cover, actually. It's definitely possible that depending on how you interpret the language and visuals of a scene, you could see a plot point or a change in character no one else did, and therefore be engaged by that where no one else was. Hell, this is what a lot of fan theories are based on. They take something that wasn't given much emphasis, and as a result no one noticed it, and use it as evidence to prove the intention of a totally new plot or story point. And fucking interpretation is beautiful. I love how people can breathe new life into things they love, but judging it is complicated. If I hide concrete evidence of something groundbreaking in my story that fixes all the plot holes and takes it from a 5 out of 10 to a 9 out of 10, but no one notices, is that story a 9 out of 10 or is it a 5 out of 10? For maybe the single person who saw the evidence, it was a 9, but for me, I'll never see that. Is that my fault or the creators? Assumedly, there must be some kind of default interpretation. I mean, the fact that fan theories have to provide evidence at all implies that we don't just accept things on a whim. We all require certain things in common in order to create our interpretations, namely in this case evidence. However, it's possible people with investment bias, people who love the work to the point of never wanting to find criticism, people who just want it to be their special thing that they can just treasure, might require less evidence than someone who doesn't have that investment bias. People like this might be quicker to find an element of a character development where others saw a flaw, which could have been what happened here, but again, absolutely could have just been bias from me instead. I'm just using this as a theoretical example. Similarly, in the hidden evidence example, there is probably some level of default when it comes to observation. If you've ever wondered why we YouTubers need bold text or surprise sound effects or zoom-ins, these are all about ensuring that our audience notices things. Emphasis on words can dramatically change a statement. It can be the difference between a normal boring sentence and a funny wordplay. Assumedly things like having your attention drawn should be a biological reaction too, so by properly using emphasis, logic, and evidence, it should be possible to guide your audience to understanding your story in a certain way. I think if that is done properly, the only different interpretations you'll get are when people are willing, for whatever reason, to find a different path than the one you've given them, whether that be to love it more, to hate it more, or even just to find something entirely new. Of course, then you start getting into intentionally open-ended stories and art pieces, which I like to think of as giving room for biases to grow. Instead of locking the audience down with concrete on-the-surface storytelling, where you show the audience exactly what's happening, interpretive pieces force the audience to start looking for clues or falling back on their own biases. Suddenly, people start searching our world for a meaning to a story, and that's going to be totally reliant on what they find, completely out of the creator's control. Then again, most fandoms slowly drill down conjecture into one widely accepted theory, so again, I think there is definitely still a default interpretation. It just takes a longer time for everyone to reach it, because rather than having all you need delivered to you, you instead have to seek out others. So yeah, like I believe there is a default good, I also believe that there is a default interpretation, also rooted in our biology. Account for all biases and you're left with the rawest interpretation of a piece. The guy with the silly swing might work best with the silly hammer, but most people will have a natural way to swing a hammer, even without anyone telling them how. Finding the grooves in the handle, the right balance of weight, the easiest motion to bring the hammer onto the nail. And that is what I am looking for when I try to decide the quote-unquote right way to interpret something. So, what does this all mean? Well, nothing really. My definition of objectively good is a term that's useless to most people. I mean, it's great for recommendations, but ultimately, if you enjoy something, then nothing else matters. The objective of the entertainment is complete for you. I talk a lot of shit on biases, but it's not like you didn't feel the emotions you felt. You should embrace your biases, there's nothing wrong with them. But for me, separating biases from engagement helps me understand this crazy medium. And one day I want to understand engagements and biases so well that I can spend my whole life designing and watching people's reactions to my work. That's been my lifelong ambition for a very long time now. Part of it's curiosity, part of it's the challenge of achieving something I set out to do. And I'm not gonna lie, a little bit of it is fame and fortune. But everything I want from life right now, it unites under one common goal. I want to understand everything.